go ahead and get it started.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you all for coming and attending today's forum for CD3 with our two great candidates, Lulu Seikaly and Sean McCaffity. I'm impressed by both, and I know after you hear them later, you'll be impressed as well. This forum is sponsored by 5 organizations, and I want to thank them. Julie Luton with McKinney Area Democratic Club, Joshua Lapidus with Collin County Young Democrats, Carolyn Werner with Plano Area Democrats, Carrie Peterson with HD89 Democrats, and Debbie O'Reilly with WOW Dems. And before we start with the format, I want to mention that we have some other candidates who are here today. I'll mention them real quickly, and we have a past candidate as well. So we have a past candidate for CD3, Lorie Burch, and if Lorie wants to say something for 15 seconds, we'd love for you to.
Hi, Mark. Why don't you call me anymore? No, I appreciate the candidates stepping up, and this is an important race. This is our future and our families on the line, so I hope we stay focused on getting the win against the Trump lapdog that we knew he was going to be and continues to be. And just remember to keep our democratic principles, our progressive principles, and knowing that we're standing on the right side of history and Black Lives Matter.
Thank you, Lorie. That sounds great. And I look forward to calling you after this forum.
I expect it, Mark.
All right. All right. And then we also have here today, and we'll let her say something for 15 seconds as well, Sharon Hirsch with HD66.
Yeah, well, thank you to everybody for putting on this forum. I'm super excited about November 2020 and we're going to build on the progress that we made in 2018, and we're going to bring some Democratic representation to Collin County in 2020. So thanks to everyone for what you're doing. Appreciate it.
All right, and I'm going to now introduce a couple other candidates, but unless I'm told otherwise, not everyone will get to speak. We'll just mention their names unless I'm wrong about that. Joshua, am I wrong about that?
You are not wrong about that.
All right. So Lorenzo Sanchez, who's running for HD67 in a primary runoff and Tom Adair is also in the same, running for HD67 in that same runoff. We have Angie Beto running for HD70. I recruited her, think highly of her. Tanya Holt is running for judge, as is Dana Hoffman. And John Turner McClellan is running for Collin County tax assessor. And if we left anyone off, if you'll send us a little something in the chat, I'll pick that up and I'll mention you a little later as we go forward. And I apologize in advance if we miss you, but we have a bunch of people coming in, and it's tough to pick up all the names as they come in. So our apologies. So now I want to discuss or mention the format of the forum. It's pretty much a standard one. There'll be an opening and a closing statement by the candidates. Each of those opening and closing statements will be 3 minutes long. There will then be a series of 6 questions, and each candidate will have the opportunity to respond to those 6 questions with 3 minutes, and then they'll also have a 1-minute rebuttal. After that series of 6 questions, we'll have approximately 4 to 6 questions, depending upon the time, where each candidate will just have 1 minute to respond, and there will be no rebuttal. And Sarah Mitchell, who is here, wave. Sarah Mitchell will be keeping time, and to the candidates, her background will change when they're yellow and red when you're done. So you should, and Sarah's not bashful and will pipe up if you're speaking too long. Yeah, and so just FYI, I've already met this week with the candidates. Well, virtually met with them and with the candidates, and we flipped a coin, and Sean won and opted to go last. So we'll then alternate after that. So we will start, I guess, with the first question and I mean the opening statements. And Lulu, you will go first. Joshua?
Yeah, before we kick that off, we're going to take all of us off the screen, so it's just the four of you.
Okay. Cool. All right.
So,
Bye, y'all. All right. And then, so now I'll just turn to opening statements, and I don't see Lulu and Sean yet. Are they, I know I saw them earlier. Are they can everyone see them?
I think they're getting rid of all the other people first.
Okay, well, I'll hold off for the opening statements until that's accomplished so that you're highlighted. All right.
we're almost
I
there.
think that almost there.
I'm gonna wait for a thumbs up from Sarah. This is how I'm gonna start. Thumbs up and start.
All right. And we've got one extra Julie Luton in participant that's not Julie Luton. Sorry about this, guys. We've got to work through a couple of mechanics. All right. I think if Joshua, correct me if I'm wrong, if Lulu speaks, she should pop up on the screen, correct or not? Where everyone will see Lulu first?
She will, but I think that might just be a setting that is on your personal computer. So
I got you. Okay, so I'm going to wait for you to get rid of the others that are in that are still in the panel.
Sounds so ominous.
I believe it's just the four of you. I think that, yep. All right, we're good to go.
Mark,
Yep.
if you'll tell everybody to just put their cursor on their screen and it'll pop it somewhere on there that you can put speaker view, then everybody can just see the person who's speaking.
All right, so if you'll repeat that so everyone can hear it, and I think that's good advice.
So if you'll just put your cursor on the screen or touch the screen if you're on your phone, it will pop up somewhere on your screen, depending on what your device is, that you can have either full your gallery view or a speaker view. And if you want to just see the speakers, you can just click on speaker view, and that whoever is speaking will pop onto your screen.
Thank you, Ginny.
All right. So now we will turn to opening statements. Each candidate will have 3 minutes. And Lulu, you are first, and we're ready for you to go.
All right, well,
Did you say 3 minutes for opening statements or 30 seconds?
3 minutes. 3 minutes
Okay.
each.
All right, well, I first want to echo what Mark said, and I want to thank all of the Democratic clubs for coming together to organize such an incredible event. Thank you to Mark Phariss and Sarah Mitchell for also participating in this event. For those of you guys who don't know me, my name is Lulu Seikaly. I am a lawyer and I'm a former teacher, and I'm running to finish what Lorie Burch started to become the first woman to represent us here in Texas's 3rd Congressional District. Now, my story starts even before I was born. In 1984, my parents fled civil war in Lebanon to come to this country to make a better life for themselves. And they did. They achieved their American dream. My dad is a doctor, my mom is a nurse, and they built a better life for me and my brother than they left behind in their home country of Lebanon. You know, growing up in North Texas, I always felt included. This North Texas community was always so good to my family and me, but life did change a lot for me after September 11th, 2001, because that was truly the first time I experienced racism. And let me tell you, it did not feel great being treated like an other in the only country I've ever known. But my parents said, keep your head held high, you were born here, you are American, but be proud of where you come from. And now they have a daughter who's running for United States Congress. You know, North Texas is my home, and I am so passionate about the issues that we're hearing people on the ground talk about. And I have been on the ground working to fight for issues that I truly care about. And that's because I believe that actions do speak louder than words. And we can't just continue talking about what we're going to do. We have to act. You know, my parents being healthcare workers growing up, I heard them to say that they were fighting with the insurance companies more than they were seeing their patients. We have to get to universal healthcare now, and this pandemic has proven that. In my legal practice, I learned a lot about how people of color are marginalized by police officers. I literally sat across the table from bad cops and advised cities on how to discipline or remove them from the force to keep their communities safer. I volunteered my time to shape our future legal minds at a local law school because I know that our young generation is the future of this country. After experiencing what I experienced after 9/11, there was no question that I was going to go to the airport during the Muslim ban to work alongside attorneys to help those who were refused entry into our country because of Trump's racist policies. As a young woman, I have seen my reproductive rights being threatened to be taken away over and over and over again. And I've worked alongside candidates and other women to make sure we elect candidates who will protect those rights in office. We all know Collin County is an exciting place to be right now. And we know Van Taylor is terrified. Collin County is becoming more diverse. And with that change, we need to elect leaders who look like this community and understand the values of our diverse community. I'm excited to be part of a new generation of service-oriented leadership in Washington because we can't change Washington until we change who we send there. Thank you.
You ready for me, Sarah?
Yes, sir. I
All right.
am.
Good job.
My name is Sean McCaffity, and I want your vote to be the Democratic nominee for Congressional District 3. We're at a moment in our history of both crisis and catalyst. There's great danger in this moment for our democratic ideals, for our economy, and for the health of our families and loved ones. But there is great opportunity as we move towards the most momentous election of our lifetimes in November, and we have to seize the opportunity. We have a chance laid out before us this November to secure healthcare as a human right and get to universal coverage. If we don't make bold reform now, we will fail the millions of people staring a real lack of health security in the midst of a global pandemic in the face. The time is now to take rapid action to clean energy economy by 2035. We have to make the most of it now because it will be too late for our kids and our kids' kids if we do not. We must come together now and tackle systems of structural racism and reckon with our dark past because a moment is upon us in the wake of George Floyd's murder, the mobilization of so many in our streets, that we must seize it. My dad loved an old series of books about a swashbuckling sea captain who always remarked to his crew before every adventure, "There is not a moment to lose." Those words have never been more true. I look forward to discussing all of these important issues tonight and why I believe my candidacy offers the boldest and necessary reforms to move our communities, our district, and our country forward. I have 20 years of experience as a trial lawyer, fighting on behalf of individuals against the powerful and corporate interests that so often take advantage of you and your families. Whether it's rooting out corporate fraud here in Collin County in the wake of the collapse of a billion-dollar public company that left hundreds unemployed, or representing a whistleblower against government officials that wrongfully terminated her for speaking out against injustice, or representing an individual's family that lost their father because of terrible workplace safety conditions. I have been there standing up for individuals in the face of gross injustice. I've also been there on behalf of the public, fighting along with my firm against voter ID laws, representing Dallas County judges against false Republican attacks on election integrity, or representing Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins to ensure Republicans played fair in his last campaign. These experiences have taught me not just a skill set that will be necessary and useful in Washington, D.C. in this new era of unprecedented corruption and graft unleashed under the Trump administration and aided and abetted by Van Taylor's complicity. For example, I know how to use a subpoena against bad actors like AG Barr. But they also remind me every day of the importance of speaking truth to power and that standing up for what is right is important, even when it is often the hard thing to do. It's this grounding from 20 years of trial practice coupled with raising my family here in this district for 20 years that makes me know I can be an effective public servant for Collin County in DC. Yeah, it's a moment of crisis and catalyst, but I choose to be a catalyst and I ask for you to choose that as well.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Now,
Also great job on staying within time. And then FYI, because I did not say this, it'll go yellow at 30 seconds and then red, and then I'll just straight up interrupt you.
No problem.
okay. So now we'll go to the first question. Lulu, you'll go first, and then Sean. And again, each candidate will have 3 minutes and then a 1-minute rebuttal. So this is a coronavirus question. How do you think the federal government has handled the COVID-19 pandemic? And what steps would you have taken as a congressperson to improve the federal COVID response? And Lulu, you're first.
Well, not to quote Trump or anything here, but the Trump administration's response has been a disaster. The president ignored his experts. He downplayed the crisis because he was too overwhelmed with a trade deal and he thought it would be bad for his reelection. So now we have over 100,000 Americans who have died because of his recklessness. And on top of that, he now wants to stop testing. That's ridiculous. I mean, even here in Texas, we see a surge of cases, and that shows what happens when you put Republicans in charge. I mean, between Greg Abbott, Dan Patrick, Ken Paxton, they spent how many weeks telling us we didn't need to wear masks? They spent how many weeks telling us that we could continue opening up the economy when they knew it wasn't safe? And to make matters worse, Trump, alongside our indicted Attorney General Ken Paxton, are asking the United States Supreme Court right now to take away our health care under the Affordable Care Act. I mean, this is easy. We need to be making decisions based on real facts and science and not at tweets at 2 in the morning. And when I get to Washington, I'm going to listen to the experts in the science, and I'm not going to put politics ahead of that. You know, Congress did step in to make sure that small businesses were being protected and were being taken care of. But at the same time, a lot of that money, and all that money was supposed to go to hardworking families, but it instead went to large corporations instead. Washington has to do more. And here in North Texas, we need a representative who cares more about scoring political points, who cares more about us than scoring political points in Washington. We know that Van Taylor is more interested in doing that because he's protecting his fellow Republicans right now to ensure that we, the people, don't know exactly where that PPP money is going. He voted against that transparency bill. He voted for zero oversight of that money. And when we have an administration that has proven time and time again that they aren't trustworthy, we need those checks and balances. And I'll make sure that here in North Texas, we're always protected.
Thank you, Lulu. Sean, 3 minutes.
I think it's self-evident that the response by the federal government has been relatively abysmal as far as dealing with the actual virus itself. That starts at the top with a culture of corruption and a culture that ignores science and fact-based evidence. And unfortunately, the narcissistic president has infused his personality into the science deliberations and public health concerns that need to take place. We obviously have to have centralized testing and contact tracing protocols. And Congress, frankly, should have taken further and bolder action when they were passing the CARES Act to ensure that there was in place a centralized testing mandate and a protocol that could be utilized across the country in a uniform manner. The way to defeat the virus, the way to save the economy, is to make sure that we actually know where the hotspots are and to be able to isolate those and be able to quarantine those so that people can go about their daily lives, businesses can remain open. Congress needs to make sure that happens by appropriating funds and mandating the type of testing and protocols that need to occur. And then they can leave it up to the executive agencies to articulate and execute those policies. But they have to make it clear with the power of the purse strings how it needs to be done and can quit delegating too much authority to the executive branch. In addition, we need to make sure that the stimulus package is rethought of. I believe that there was a good first step, and it was an extremely chaotic time with the collapse of the market at the same time as the pandemic was spiraling. But the reality is that the coronavirus response was largely disconnected from the people that it was actually intended to help. It did help small businesses, but large corporations took advantage of it. There is no oversight going back to the corruption that is rampant because of the administration in place right now. And we didn't help individuals. One check for $1,200 is not going to last for an entire year. It is not going to last for a month. We need the ability to give monthly cash payments to put a pause on the economy so that we can actually get it under control, because through being able to pause the economy, to be able to contact trace and rein in and cap where the hotspots are, you will be able to not only save our healthcare infrastructure and hospital infrastructure, but you'll be able to actually slow down the spread of the virus sufficiently to allow people to go about their daily lives. And in the meantime, things like mortgage and rent abatement and direct cash transfers to individuals need to be commonplace, because we need to reconnect the congressional response, the stimulated response, to the actual workers that are having to bear the brunt of the virus today.
Thank you. Now, by the way, I forgot to say at the very beginning, the questions have come from our sponsoring organizations. And now we'll turn to a rebuttal, 1 minute for Lulu and then a 1 minute for Sean.
Look, Sean and I agree on a lot of things, and a lot of the things that he said and I said were very similar. So I honestly have nothing to add.
Thank you, Lulu. Sean?
I mean, obviously she didn't rebut anything, so I will say there was one other thing that I wanted to say, and I'm happy, I suspect Lulu will agree with me on this, but I believe that we need to make sure that because of the way the coronavirus is racially disparate, impacting racial communities, minority communities in a disparate way, that the congressional reaction needs to be appropriate as well. And we need to make sure that both from a healthcare infrastructure standpoint, we're addressing those issues, as well as how we give aid and financial resources to those issues as well, to try to make sure that that income inequality and wealth equality gap doesn't grow anymore because of the disparate impact of the coronavirus.
Thank you. All right, next is a criminal justice reform question. Congressional Democrats recently unveiled a police reform bill, which is aimed at combating excessive use of force and racial discrimination by the police. Do you support this bill? Why or why not? And what, if anything, would you have added or subtracted from it? You have 3 minutes again initially, and we'll start with Sean.
So there's a famous Polish-born Jewish theologian and philosopher named Abraham Joshua Heschel. He escaped pre-World War II Germany and a deportation to Poland and became active in America during the '60s civil rights movement. And I respect him. I've read a lot of his work. And there's a letter he wrote in 1963 to President John F. Kennedy, where he was talking about a meeting he was going to have the next day with the leadership about the racial unrest and the civil rights problems that were going on in America in the '60s. And he asked President Kennedy in that letter to declare a moral state of emergency and a Marshall Plan for Black Americans. And he ended his letter with, "It is now time. This hour calls for a higher moral grandeur and spiritual audacity." And here we are 60 years later dealing with many of these same issues. It is now time as well of high moral grandeur and spiritual audacity. And the Justice and Policing Act is a great first step to be able to repair some of the problems in the criminal justice system as they relate to racial injustice and systemic racism in our criminal justice system. We have local elected officials here that have declared asked to declare a Black state of emergency. You see unrest in the streets in the wake of the George Floyd murders. You see a president that inflames racial tensions all the time. And yet the Democrats in the Congress have just passed an act that does much to try to bridge the gap in the criminal justice system, racial inequality. So yes, I do support it. I think it is a good thing that we are trying to limit and end racial profiling and religious profiling. It's a good thing that we're creating excessive force standards that will be uniform across the country. It's a good thing that we're ending qualified immunity, which is too often used as a get out of jail free card for abusive, excessively violent police officers and law enforcement that violate our constitutional rights. But we need to go further than that. We need to do things that address the problem of endemic systemic racism in the criminal justice system, not just between law enforcement encounters and minorities in this country, but we also have to address the problem of mass incarceration, the problem of private prisons, the problem of bail that creates a wealth inequality gap that makes sure that our continued oppression of Black individuals in America occurs. We need to address the war on drugs and the racial overtones and explicit bias that the sentencing penalties and the law enforcement mechanisms created by the war on drugs have ripple effects from the '80s into our systemic criminal justice injustice. All of these things need to be accounted for, and the Criminal Justice and Policing Act is a great first step, and it's one that we need to continue to build on and use as energy to actually go into other areas of our society for legislation where we can bridge those gaps of racial and systemic injustice.
Thank you, Sean. Lulu, 3 minutes.
So this is no secret. This is an extraordinary time in our nation's history, and it honestly should not have taken the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others to push for these police reforms. I mean, just in Breonna Taylor's instance, the last time I looked, only one officer has lost his job, and there have been 0 arrests in her death. But we need a new generation of leaders in an elected office because politicians have consistently failed communities of color. We know that police brutality disproportionately affects our most vulnerable communities, like our immigrant communities, our communities of color, our trans communities. I worked as an attorney representing cities, and I literally, in the most literal sense, sat across the table from bad cops. I advise cities on how to hold police officers accountable. So I have seen firsthand the major gaps and holes in our system and how the system is rigged to protect those cops over protecting our communities. I watch bad cops get off because the rules were so rigged in their favor, and we need this reform to change the system. But, you know, like Sean said, this isn't just about the police. It's about a whole system that has been racist in a systemic way, and we need to take real steps to change that. You know, I am in full support of the Justice in Policing Act. This is what great first step, but we do need to do more. You know, in my practice, from what I've seen in my practice, we need more thorough psychiatric evaluations that truly assess an officer's mental and emotional state before we even hand them a weapon and send them out into our communities to protect them. You know, that's one of the biggest gaps that I've seen. And this is in addition to all the other great first steps in the Justice in Policing Act, like ending qualified immunity, banning chokeholds, increasing transparency and accountability, etc.
Thank you, Lulu. So now we go to a 1-minute rebuttal for each, and Sean.
We really need to make sure that we create legislation that goes to the root of the problem, which is holding corrupt actors accountable and tries to do things to bridge the gap of inequality, both from a systemic injustice problem as well as from a financial inequality problem, which breeds upon itself further and further systemic injustice. In my practice, I have the occasion right now of actually litigating qualified immunity. I know exactly what that problem, how much of a problem that creates. And it's often used by cities and by municipalities and political subdivisions as a shield to be able to not hold police officers accountable. We need to be able to live up to what we tried to do when we passed the act in 1891 in the wake of the Civil War and the rise of the Ku Klux Klan Act, to make sure that civil rights and constitutional violations are actually held responsible and end qualified immunity. I'm glad to hear that Ms. Seikaly is on board with that as well.
Lulu?
Nothing further. I stand by what I said earlier.
Okay. Next question, the third question, climate change. How would you address it? And Lulu, you're first up with 3 minutes.
So we absolutely need full leadership on this issue right now. We need to take action now. And frankly, we should have taken action yesterday. This requires bold action and leadership, and we're not seeing that from Washington right now. I mean, look at our administration right now. They're not believing science and facts when it comes to COVID-19. They surely aren't believing science and facts when it comes to our forever changing climate. You know, even though 97% of scientists and national security officials agree that climate change is the biggest threat of our time, Republicans like Trump and Van Taylor refuse to act on it. First thing we need to do, we need to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. You know, the second thing we need to do is that we need to get to 100% clean energy economy by 2050. We need to eliminate carbon pollution caused by carbon emissions by 2050. Look, guys, Van Taylor is awful when it comes to climate. He only has a 7% approval rating by the legal conservation voters. He is funded by the fossil fuel industry. We truly need somebody who's going to take this seriously. We can't play politics with climate change. And this is gonna be a huge fight. And we need somebody who isn't in the pockets of corporation like Van Taylor is, someone who is willing to work across the aisle to get this done, because we can't play politics about the issue, and we truly need bipartisan support in order to achieve a workable, actionable plan.
Thank you, Lulu. Sean, 3 minutes.
So the science on climate change, according to the latest science and the consensus of science, says that in order to hold our climate warming to 2 degrees Celsius by 2100, we have to have a carbon-free economy globally by 2050. And that will help us maintain a glide path of warming between a degree and a half to 2 degrees Celsius by 2100, which will not eliminate the actual environmental impacts of climate change that can be so catastrophic, especially to indigenous peoples in coastal line regions, but it will allow us to adapt and mitigate some of the worst effects. That comes from the IPCC report, as well as consensus of sciences in Europe and America. What that means for American policy is that we have wasted way too much time. The last 3 years of the Trump administration have been a complete waste. And frankly, years before that have been a waste. We should have been acting on this in the 1990s. We have to get to 100% clean energy by 2035. And the way you do that is you actually work towards 100% emission standards for light and medium duty vehicles and buses right away by 2030. You work towards zero carbon pollution now in all our commercial and residential buildings. And you actually work to make sure that we have an American economy that's a green energy economy by 2035 so that we can actually hit the targets of 2050. Because if we wait to 2050 to try to have the American economy be carbon free or green energy, we will for sure overshoot our chance. We need to use it as an opportunity to modernize and upgrade our electricity infrastructure and our infrastructure generally. And frankly, I think that is the place where we can actually use our ability as a federal government to leverage job training opportunities to move people from oil field services and fossil fuel industry jobs into infrastructure and construction jobs to build out a new 21st century economy and infrastructure. And we also, this is a problem that is so big, so problematic for our world, our globe, that we have to consider seriously carbon taxes and carbon tax dividends to be able to incentivize businesses to actually take carbon seriously. Because the problem with the market is it can be ruthlessly efficient. But when you are dealing with a climate problem where the delays and the externalities associated with pollution and climate change and warming are in the future, and shareholders and profiteers and business don't see them immediately, they have no incentive to change their behavior. And so one way that you can address that is to include some sort of carbon tax so that you can actually start them on the path of realizing there are real costs to pay for this, while also reducing the fossil fuel subsidies. We spend about $25 billion subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. We can remove those things and actually make renewables a much more efficient market choice to actually speed up and make climate change by green energy by 2035 a realistic option. We shouldn't abandon any tools in our toolkit. Our kids will never forgive us.
Thank you, Sean. Lulu, now 1 minute rebuttal.
Look, I agree with Sean. We have to act now. I mean, we both agree. We wasted 3 years with this Trump administration by not acting immediately. We've been wasting a lot of time. But, you know, getting to 100% clean energy economy by 2050 is a plan that is supported by over 150 House Democrats. It's supported by the League of Conservation Voters and the Sierra Club. And look, I'm in my early 30s, so I'm part of the generation that's going to be most impacted by this. If we can get to clean new energy earlier than 2050, by all means. This is just another thing that I'm listening to the scientists and experts, because I am no climate change scientist by any way, shape, or form. You know, so what we have to do is we have to start electing different types of representatives that are going to be actually going to be open and honest and listening to the scientists and the experts about what it's going to take to solve these problems. You know, Sean and I have the same goal, is 100% clean energy economy by whatever date it is. We differ on the dates, but my plan is backed by, you know, experts and scientists also.
Thank you, Lulu. Sean?
Yeah, I disagree. Actually, I think the science says you have to do it by 2035. And the politically expedient thing is to use the 2050 number to make it seem like it's not a problem that we need to address right now. There is a reason that centrist moderate Democrats in the House support 2050 for clean energy, because they're taking the science number that says we have to have a global clean energy carbon-free environment by 2050 and saying we should use that for American standards. We will never get to global clean energy by 2050, carbon-free by 2050, if America does not lead and take the lead. We've been wasting our leadership opportunity for the last 3 years when we've been dismantling the liberal international order. And this is a place where we need to lead by example and drag the rest of the world with us. And if we cannot get our S together enough to be able to change our economy to green energy by 2035, we will be failing our generation, our kids' generation, and all of the generations after them.
Thank you. All right, question number 4. It's on healthcare. Once you are elected, what will be your approach to healthcare reform? Explain why your approach is better than your opponents and how you will convince others in Congress to support your approach. And we begin with Sean with 3 minutes.
So I believe that universal healthcare is where we need to end up, that healthcare is a human right. And that once you recognize that healthcare is a human right, and once you recognize that there is so much healthcare uncertainty, particularly in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic, then you can no longer accept the status quo. you have to ask for bold change to try to get us to a healthcare that works for people so that they don't have to worry about going bankrupt or going to the doctor. What does that look like? I think it means that we have to do things to tackle big pharmaceuticals, big pharma right away, so that the pharmaceutical prices and the prescription drug prices that individuals rely on every day come back to within some sort of reasonable ability of them to pay it, or actually not have to pay it at all because it's covered by the government. We have to authorize Medicare and the government to be able to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies for their pricing so that the pricing is leveraged by the power of the economies of scale of the government. And we have to end tax deductions for pharmaceutical companies advertising so that they can no longer flood our communities with opioids, or convince doctors to prescribe medicine just because it sounds cool and they have a snazzy advertisement. We have to increase oversight and antitrust enforcement of pharmaceutical companies to ensure that they are in fact playing by the rules and not gouging people. I've spent in my career time actually litigating against pharmaceutical companies. And just in the last couple of years, we were litigating against a company here that was responsible for putting drugs out in the market that caused elderly people to go blind. And we were able to work in that litigation to be able to get it removed from the market. I know it can be done, and we need that kind of skill set in DC to be able to take dangerous drugs off the market and make sure the drugs that are necessary are actually affordable. And as far as universal coverage, we need to expand it as soon as possible. I think we need a statutory mandate that actually says we're going to create an option for universal coverage with a statutory mandated transition for entire universal coverage within 4 years. And if we don't do that, we're failing again our brothers and sisters that are completely staring financial ruin or death or health problems in the face. It's too important of a problem to ignore, and we have to take aggressive action on it now. And one of the very first things we have to do, because of the legislation, or sorry, the constitutional attack on the Affordable Care Act, is we have to reverse the Trump tax cuts. It'll pay for a lot of the healthcare issues. It'll make sure that individuals can actually be provided the healthcare they need, but it will also take away the constitutional argument that is being propounded at the Supreme Court right now, which is there's no tax mandate, so therefore you can't use the taxing power. If you reverse those cuts, you not only help restore the ability of our government to function because they have revenue, but you also take away the argument that Ken Paxton and others are making right now to the Supreme Court for why it's unconstitutional.
Thank you, Sean. Lulu, 3 minutes.
So we have been talking about healthcare since day one, and that is because that is the #1 issue we hear about. And Donald Trump and Ken Paxton, like Sean just said, are trying to take it away during this pandemic when people need it the absolute most. So step one, to be quite honest, is getting rid of Republicans like Donald Trump and Van Taylor. We have to get them out of office because every day they're staying in Washington, it's threatening the existence of the Affordable Care Act. And look, I know people have their opinions about the Affordable Care Act, but I know it's not perfect, but it was a great first step because it provided a lot of protections that we didn't have before. Step 2 is that we need to provide universal health care coverage immediately, and we have to do that by introducing a public option. We have to make sure that health insurance is affordable, it's accessible, and it's of the highest quality. The goal is to cover as many people as possible and make it as affordable as possible. And even with that, we have to make sure that women's reproductive rights and women's health care is also protected and not threatened to be taken away. You know, during COVID-19, I've been talking to a lot of our constituents in the district, and with my dad being a physician, my dad had to move to telemedicine for a little bit. And I think we need to start investing more in telemedicine and not allowing the insurance companies to not cover it, you know, for prescribers. I think that's very important. It's going to provide more accessibility to everybody who's able to access telemedicine, and it's going to bring the costs down. And again, during COVID-19, something else that we've been hearing a lot about is that we really need to start investing more in mental health care. You know, like Sean said, we're talking about pharmaceutical companies and making sure that, you know, as the government, we can start negotiating so that way they can stop price gouging us, because we need somebody in Washington, and Van Taylor surely is not that person, who's going to fight for lowering the cost of prescription drugs, because the pharmaceutical companies are continuing to price gouge our medicine, and individuals should not have to choose between paying their mortgage or paying for insulin. We know that healthcare is a very complicated issue, but at the same time, it's very simple. We have to provide affordable, accessible, quality healthcare for everyone. And we have to start right away, because if we don't, we have to start undoing the damage the Republicans have done by chipping away at our rights to healthcare. And, you know, after months of being on the campaign trail with Sean, I think Sean and I are on the same page about this. We have the same goal to get to universal healthcare.
Thank you, Lulu. All right, Sean, you have 1 minute rebuttal.
I don't know that we are on the same page, because using the words affordable, accessible, quality care is not the same thing as universal care. And saying public option is a way to get to universal care without explaining what you mean by that is not universal care. We need a statutory mandate that says we will go to a single payer system within 4 years, using a public option as a transition from our existing system to get there. That's the only way for it to work, because otherwise the politically expedient thing to do will be to kick the can down the road and wait 20 or 30 years for maybe some sort of social change to allow universal care to take about. In fact, I've heard my opponents say that in meet and greets. So I don't think that we do agree about how aggressive we can be and need to be. Universal care means everybody gets an expansive, broad care. It's not about affordability or accessibility. It's about making sure that healthcare is recognized as a human right and we actually provide it.
Thank you, Sean. Lulu, 1 minute.
So I'm wondering if we're just playing with words here. You know, it sounds like Sean has now changed his position as a Medicare for All system, which, you know, to me, universal healthcare is providing that public option to allow people to hop on if they aren't covered, if they lost their jobs, you know, for whatever reason. So, you know, my goal, I agree, healthcare is a right. And I absolutely agree that in order to get there as quickly as possible, we have to start working towards, you know, we have to start expanding the Affordable Care Act. That's the most important thing we can do right now. The goal, again, is to get affordable coverage to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. And so I guess the difference now I'm hearing is that I want to do that now. I mean, although our goal is the same at getting to universal healthcare coverage, which I believe Sean is wanting to get to a Medicare for All system.
Okay. We now have a, all right, so I'm going to exercise a little liberty and Sean give you 30 seconds to respond, and then I'm going to give Lulu you 30 seconds to respond.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think it's very, I mean, I don't think there's a semantics disagreement. I think when you say affordable and accessible care, it actually means you're willing to just work with the ACA and just see what the market does. And I'm suggesting that we need to have a mandated shift to single payer by the end of 4 years. And we can use a public option to do that, to create the runway that's necessary to be able to create it. But it's a different thing. In the wake of the pandemic, coronavirus pandemic, it has laid bare the failure of employer-based healthcare. There are now 30 to 40 million people that are uninsured that don't have healthcare or could lose it because of their unemployment. We have to take care of those folks.
Lulu, 30 seconds, please.
So it sounds like Sean is now wanting to get rid of the private insurance companies and go to one single payer system. My plan is to have two options, that if you want to stay on your plan, it's Medicare for all who want it, like Pete Buttigieg was saying on the campaign trail. So I believe that that's maybe the difference now, the first time I've heard it, that Sean is Medicare for all and I'm still a public option expansion of the ACA.
Thank you, Lulu. Immigration. The Trump administration has suspended certain visas. What visa program would you support that would allow skilled foreign workers into the country while protecting jobs for Americans that already possess those skills? Additionally, do you believe in a path to citizenship for dreamers and others who have fallen through the cracks of our complex immigration system? 3 minutes, and Lulu, you're up first.
So I am the daughter of immigrants. I was born in this amazing country that was built on the backs and dreams of immigrants. And my parents were fortunate because they really benefited from a compassionate immigration system when they came to this country in the mid-'80s. So I know that the strength of our communities really lies with our diversity in culture, our diversity in religion and thought. And that is so very true, especially today here in Collin County. The harmful rhetoric of the Trump administration towards immigrants, particularly those of different faiths and skin colors, does nothing to further divide our country. You know, in fact, many of those on the front line during this pandemic, still on the front line during this pandemic, are immigrants or their first generations like me. And here in Collin County, we are experiencing a huge tech boom, which is no surprise to anybody on this call. And some of the businesses that I've actually had the pleasure of visiting pre-COVID-19 most of their workers are on these exact visas. we know why Trump is doing this. He's preventing people that look like me, as well as South Asians and Latinos, from coming into this country. We know it's going to have devastating consequences, not only for these families, but for our economy. It's going to rob us of these skilled workers. These immigrants aren't taking anybody's job away, like Trump is trying to say to people. They're giving US businesses talent and skilled labor to continue growing and innovating. It's going to do things like driving startup companies and startup founders overseas, and we're never going to see those jobs back. You know, tech hubs will stop growing in Plano and Frisco, and they're going to start growing overseas. So instead of cutting back on immigrant workers, what we should be doing is streamlining the process. You know, as it relates to the Dreamers, we have to provide a path to citizenship for those who are contributing to society, paying taxes, they don't have violent criminal records. You know, naturalizing DACA recipients who came to this country under no choice of their own, we educate them, and it's the only country they've ever known. So there's no reason why they should not be allowed to stay. I know a lot of you guys probably heard there was the Supreme Court decision a few weeks ago, and that was a really great step forward for DACA recipients, but we have to do more. We have to enact legislation to assure that these Dreamers continue to be protected, and I'm always going to fight for our Dreamers.
Thank you, Lulu. Sean, 3 minutes.
So American immigration policy in the last 3 years under Trump has become an embarrassment. I worry that he has done irreparable damage to individuals that are currently detained on the border, our child and families that have been separated and caged on the border during this problem. I worry that he's done irretrievable damage to our standing in the world because of our own inability to recognize the need for people to actually seek refuge and shelter from credible fears of persecution, or just trying to make their world a better place for themselves and their family. The latest effort by Trump to roll back visa allowances under H-1B and V and L is a similarly xenophobic and racist policy that is built upon a lie that I reject. Those skilled workers don't come over here to take away jobs. What people don't know is that in order to apply to get an H-1B visa, businesses in America have to certify that it's not going to impact the labor force and notify their employees that the job is going up, so that there is no impact on our force. What it does is it prevents skilled workers from coming in that actually can do things like fulfill shortages in our nursing facilities. I have a friend of mine that runs small income nursing facilities in Dallas, and he talks all the time about how there's a massive nursing shortage and that the immigration restrictions are having a huge impact on his ability to fill nursing jobs, because they're a really good source of nurses. And it's much harder now, and that's a place where we can look to solve that particular labor shortage in the American economy. So we need to roll back the Trump rollbacks on our visas so that we actually are trying to be serious about growing our economy in the future. I've heard another commentator say that if we're serious about competing against China in the 21st century, cutting off our ability to get skilled workers to attract them into our economy will make sure that we do not compete with China in the future. So for all of the reasons that I just said, we need to make sure that we actively encourage immigration from skilled workforces and increase the amount of immigration and make it more efficient and easier. With respect to Dreamers, as a small business owner and runner of a law firm, I've actually had the pleasure of working and hiring and employing a Dreamer. And I know from firsthand experience the quality of work, quality of person, and contributions to our country these folks give. She's now gone on to become a lawyer and lives on the West Coast now, being a practicing attorney. It's awesome. We need to codify the DACA protections that were originally introduced by Obama and then upheld recently by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court was just a reprieve, and we have to codify that into law and make sure that they have a natural path to citizenship right away. We must protect our Dreamers.
Thank you. I am going to call a lateral. We're running a little long on time. So we'll have, instead of 1 minute rebuttals, we'll have half-minute rebuttals, if that's okay. So now we'll go to, and I said a lateral, I'll call an audible, not a lateral. I'm going to get in trouble by all my football friends. So now I'll go to Lulu for half a minute.
Again, this is something Sean and I also agree on, so I don't have anything further to add.
Saving time every day.
That's trying.
Sean, you?
I got nothing else to add unless you want to propound on the immigration question. I think I answered them.
Y'all are helping me out. I appreciate that.
I'm trying to make you Mark. It's fine.
All right. So thank you. So now I'll go to trade. Trade's a vital part of our country's economic success. The U.S. has been locked in a trade war with several of our top trading partners. First, do you believe the existing tariffs are effective in leveraging trade deals that benefit our country? Second, should the tariffs continue as is, or should they be adjusted in light of the pandemic and economic downturn? So I'm going to go with, if we could, I'm going to reduce the answers down to 2 minutes. So Sean, go 2 minutes, and then Lulu will have 2 minutes, and then we'll go to the rebuttal.
So 2 questions. One is, are the tariffs effective? No. The answer is no. I don't believe the tariffs are effective. We have a problem with the ability of those tariffs to actually create the kind of leverage that we think they're creating, because we're dealing with authoritarian regimes, usually on the other side, like China, in which they are not responsive to the type of economic pressure and political pressure that democratic countries often are, and like we are. And so when we impose unilateral tariffs on a country like China, especially massive tariffs of the size that Trump has done, what he has done is really destabilized markets, but have not really caused enough economic pain on China for them to do anything in response and to negotiate with us actually in a good faith manner going forward. So I don't believe they're effective, and I don't believe that a tariff policy or protectionist policy, particularly against authoritarian regimes, is really consistent with international political economy and our ability to actually get something done. What we need to do is work with partners to create coalitions to fight against those types of large multi-million, billion-dollar person economies, to be able to actually create the kind of leverage we need to create better trade deals. So I don't think the tariffs work. I think we need to have a much broader multilateral approach to our trade deals. Should they be adjusted in the wake of the pandemic? Yeah, we should reduce them, because they're costing the American taxpayers lots more money, because that's what a tariff is. It's a tax. And it would also provide our ability probably to be able to stop sending billions of farm bailout money to the Midwest farm companies, because they could actually start competing again, as opposed to having to just have our deficits run up to be able to protect our farmers.
All right, Lulu,
So-
2 minutes.
2 minutes. All right. So Trump's irrational and reckless tariffs are a tax on American families. This is a tax that we can't afford. They don't allow small business owners, especially like small businesses here in Collin County, to be able to project future costs, which in turn then hinders their ability to grow their business and hire new workers. So for too long, our trade agreements here, especially under Trump, have been negotiated to reflect the interests of large corporations rather than small businesses, rather than workers, rather than the consumers. So our trade policy should really, really promote competition. They shouldn't facilitate increasing consolidation of profits and power among the world's largest corporations. So we first and foremost have to ensure that all stakeholders have an equal voice at the tables, from small business owners all the way up to national security experts. I would make sure that we could prioritize those policies to open new markets for small businesses and workers, and oppose those that are beneficial for large corporations. You know, manufacturing in the United States is important for our national security, and that was incredibly important during this COVID-19 pandemic, because we couldn't get access to essential medical supplies. You know, part of our trade agreements should also be diplomacy. We should be using our trade agreements to strengthen and increase our diplomatic relationships. You know, trade deals, we talked about the climate before, but our trade deals need to have stronger environmental protections as well, so that these deals aren't contributing to more carbon pollution and taking our plan backwards to getting to 100% clean new energy. You know, I've been endorsed by the AFL-CIO, the state unions, as well as the local Teamsters and the local CWA. You know, these trade agreements also need to have worker protection. So I will be making sure I'll be fighting for workers. So we have to add working standards for our union brothers and sisters to make sure they're also protected.
Okay. Now we have a 1 minute rebuttal. Sean.
Yeah, I mean, I also been endorsed by the AFL-CIO, and I totally agree that we need to have worker protections as part of the table. When we negotiate new trade deals, the other thing that we need to make sure that we deal with is whether or not we allow as Congress fast track authority for the executive to do it. And that's up for renewal in 2021, and whether or not we'll be able to allow that. I actually frankly think in order to do the types of environmental protections and worker protections that are necessary, this is probably the first time where it may make real sense for Congress to take back some of the negotiating authority and remove some of the fast track authority from the executive. Congress has ceded so much power to the executive over the last 10, 20, 30 years. This is one area where, and now one time in the wake of Trump, to make sure that we get our trade policy right when we redo it, that Congress should probably be sitting at the table to make sure that those constituent interests are actually protected.
Thank you, Sean. Lulu?
Saving time. I have nothing further.
Thank you very much. All right, now we'll go to the 1-minute questions. And we start with Sean. You're both lawyers. What is, again, it's 1 minute. What is the case you are most proud of working on, and why?
So the case I'm most proud of working on, I think I've talked about this one other time in public here in this campaign, is a case I actually lost, which that sucks. But it really speaks to the lesson and why I'm running, which is you take on a cause that you believe in and you speak truth to power no matter what. I represented a whistleblower that lost her job because she spoke out against a county official in Dallas and was wrongfully terminated for it. And I believe that and I still to this day believe that she was speaking out against injustice that she saw and tried to do the right thing and was terminated expressly for it. And while we didn't recover a money damage, we actually did get a finding from the jury after cross-examining a sitting judge on the bench, in the witness box, I should say, that the judge wrongfully terminated her. And the relief and the stress and the guilt that was relieved off of my client's shoulders for all that she was carrying with her, for putting her family through because she lost her job, was worth it, and reminds me every day of the importance of speaking truth to power.
Lulu?
I know I've been talking about this a lot, but working as a lawyer, I've sat across the table from bad cops, and the system we've seen it over and over again, that the system is set up to give bad cops a lot of free passes. So when you get a bad cop off the street, it's incredibly successful. So in one case, I helped a city terminate a cop who racially profiled a young boy and roughed him up quite a bit. And because of the law, the police officer was entitled to a lot of protections, and he appealed the termination. And after going through almost a 6-day hearing for a police officer termination, we prevailed. And because we prevailed, the streets of that community were much safer as a result.
Thank you. Second question. Give us one reason why Van Taylor should be defeated, just one, and how will you defeat him? So Lulu, you're first up.
His voting record, and we will defeat him because we know that Collin County doesn't want representation like that. We've been working already to expand the electorate, to engage communities that have never been engaged before in the political process. We're educating them, letting them know why Van Taylor is a really bad representative, and we're getting them involved and fired up and excited to go cast a vote. So that's how we're going to win and beat Van Taylor.
Thank you. So Sean, 1 minute.
I actually like the answer, his voting record, because it sums up so much, really, at the end of the day. That's right. I mean, he's a Trump lackey, and he's complicit in the dismantling of our republic's law and order, or rule of law, I should say. And he's untethered to his constitutional obligation, in my opinion. How do you defeat him? I like to think of it as we have to combat the conservative narrative by explaining to them the problems and the failures and the utter lack of compassion in the status quo, and building a narrative as to why we can have real change that actually works for real people. And the way you do that is by explaining to them and building a strong, good case for all of those positions that Van Taylor took the wrong one on. Am I yellow or red? What's going on there?
You're yellow.
Sorry, that was on me. You're yellow.
All right, that's okay. Sorry, you confused me, but that's okay. That's okay. So I'll conclude with this, like a little quick story, is that there's a graduation speech by David Foster Wallace where he tells the joke of there's two fish swimming along, and an older fish comes up and says, "Hey boys, how's the water?" And the two fish keep going by, and a couple of seconds later say, "What the hell is water?" And the point is that we live in a broken status quo. And we
Thank you,
have to be
Sean.
able to tell people why it's broken and how to change it.
Thank you, Sean. All right, so next, this is kind of an interesting question, just FYI to everyone. I'm at the lake at our lake house, and it's in Gun Barrel City, Texas. So this is a gun sense legislation question. We know it will be difficult to get sensible gun legislation through Congress, but what is one reform you would propose that might achieve bipartisan support? And Sean, you're up first with 1 minute.
That's a hard one because the Republican Party is so entrenched because of the National Rifle Association. But I think there are two things that we need to really focus on. One is, I think, universal background checks. I think the polling is very clear that that is wildly popular and that people actually support it. And that if you focus on actually getting that done, that you might be able to get bipartisan support, especially if you're able to do some of the democracy reform things that we really need to be able to take back control of our democracy for people and reduce campaign finance issues and the power of lobbyists. Another interesting thing that I think may garner Republican support, I don't know, is requiring insurance for gun owners, specifically procured for guns, because Republicans I know like insurance. They like insurance companies, and let's use the power of the insurance lobby against the NRA and let them go at it.
Thank you, Sean. Lulu?
So universal background checks, that's the first thing that comes to mind as well, which is supported by a majority of Americans, even a lot of Republicans support it as well. I do think that we can work towards bipartisan support in strengthening our red flag laws to protect women from abusers. You know, we absolutely, when we talk about gun violence reform and gun violence prevention, excuse me, we need someone who's going to be able to take bold leadership to get this done. And so because of that, it's time for bold leadership, which is also why I support an assault weapons ban as well. I think that may be harder for bipartisan support, but I will be fighting like heck for it.
Thank you, Lulu. All right, the fourth 1 minute question, and Lulu, we'll start with you. When you win the runoff, what will you do to help elect Democrats up and down the ballot in Collin County?
So we have been working already to expand the electorate. And when people talk about turning Texas blue, they're talking about communities like ours going blue, these suburban districts, highly educated districts. You know, there's excitement at every part of this ballot, from the president all to flipping the state house to overturning the Collin County judicial bench. And if we work together, I am confident we can turn Collin County blue.
Thank you. Sean?
I think we would work really closely with the House districts that sit inside this congressional district to make sure there's a strong coordinated campaign effort between the congressional race and HD 66, 67, 89, to make sure, because all ships rise on a rising tide, and we need to work together and make sure we pool our resources and do it as strongly and coordinated fashion as possible. And not just the House district races, but the down ballot judge races. There are good judges on this. Judge to be Tanya Hold and Dana Huffman are on this call today. We need to work with those folks, as well as our Court of Appeals justices here, like Judge Goldstein and Judge Smith, to get them on the ballot. You know, a strong coordinated effort at the congressional level will make sure that all ships rise and make sure that we get as many Democrats in office up and down the ballot as possible in 2020.
Great. Thank you, Sean. So this is the fifth 1 minute question. We'll start with Sean. As a freshman U.S. representative, what will you make your first priority in Washington to be that will most benefit the people of our state?
So I talk about this as a threshold issue all the time, and I think it's maybe indirect in the sense that you won't necessarily see an immediate like monetary or economic effect. But I really believe that the first thing we need to do is pass legislation that really tries to reform our democracy in a real serious way. Legislation that works on campaign finance reform, that gets money out of politics, legislation that ends partisan gerrymandering, legislation that expands the voting franchise and restores the Voting Rights Act so that voter suppression tactics actually aren't felt on a daily or semi-daily basis, I guess annual basis during the elections when you have the GOP being able to hold on to power. That type of legislation needs to be done immediately and should be a priority. There's a reason that type of legislation was HR 1 in this last congressional session. It needs to be again, and it will have an immediate and profound effect on this district in a positive way, because it will return power to the people so that lasting change on healthcare and climate change and gun reform can actually be had.
Thank you, Sean. Lulu?
This goes back to the #1 issue I said at the beginning that we're hearing on the ground, and that's fighting for accessible, affordable, universal health care. And I think we can do it.
Okay. We're going to keep going on 1-minute questions. So this is the 6th question. Excluding, and we start with you, Lulu. Excluding topics we've touched upon this evening, what bill would you introduce or co-sponsor when you get to Washington? Again, a topic we haven't touched on.
So we went a whole hour and 10 minutes of this whole debate talking about all these really amazing, important issues, but we haven't been asked about women's reproductive rights and choice. And so I will always bring this issue up, and I will always defend a woman's right to choose.
Thank you, Lulu. Sean?
I think we really need to focus on making sure that the Equality Act passes. I mean, it's the recent Supreme Court decision holding that Title VII is definition of sex includes sexual orientation is a great bellwether for the appetite, I think, in our society to make sure that we actually codify protections across the board. And so I would certainly sign on immediately to try to get those types of protections, expansive protections for civil rights for LGBTQ community passed immediately. Mark is muted.
Thank you. Thank you. I was being my most articulate when I was muted. So this question will go to Sean at first. Excluding criminal justice reform, what's a step we can take toward fighting systemic racism in our country?
I've been thinking a lot about this and trying to think as deeply as I can about it. I think of this issue as that there's a multi-bucket issue because there's so many different policy areas of systemic injustice and systemic racism exist in: education, healthcare, the environment. We have to address it in all of those areas. I think a really good way to start is by focusing on the commission, the HR 40 reparations study that Sheila Jackson Lee proposed, that is out there, has been out there for many, many years, but hasn't ever actually gotten any traction. We're at a unique moment right now where it's important for that to happen, and that we need to have that type of study in reckoning with our past, because Black lives do matter, and we need to be able to own up to it. We should look seriously into passing a legislation that says there's a Truth and Reconciliation Commission so that we can actually take action to build equity among our Black and minority communities and communities of color to make up for the lost time, because there's been so much lost time and it's been so intentional.
Thank you, Sean. Lulu?
So, so often we speak about our racist history, and let me tell you from personal experience, it's not just history. It's 2020, and I can't believe it's still all too common for people who look differently to be treated differently at the same time. The police reform bills that have been put through Congress are a really strong first step. It's the most we've done in a very long time, since the civil rights movement, but this is a larger conversation as a nation that we have to address, and we can't stop talking about this conversation, or else we lose all momentum going forward to really try and fix the problem.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to, this is another audible. So, and we'll go first to Lulu. Will you support legislation to end prison gerrymandering, where you count a prisoner as being, for census purposes, as a resident of the prison rather than the community from which they came? And if you will, how would you go about that and why?
I would just say yes, absolutely. I think we absolutely need to end that. Absolutely.
All right, and Sean.
Yeah, I would do that. I would make sure that the census forms actually reflect, in place of incarceration as well as place of residence or place of birth or something to that effect, and to make sure that that is properly recorded and tabulated. What that actually looks like, I don't know what that form would look like yet, but it is a practice that is very problematic and needs to be ended.
All right, thank you all. All right, I have looked at some of the questions that we've received online. We've only received 3. We've covered 2 of them. I actually think we've probably covered all 3 of them. So with that in mind, and since we're at 8:14, I'm going to let us go ahead and go to closing remarks. And unless, Joshua, unless you want me to wait and see. Okay, wait a minute. I've got another question. So I'm going to go ahead and ask this with 1 minute. I did have time for one more 1-minute question. So and let me see whose turn it is. Lulu would be, no, Sean, would be you first. How would you combat unpaid prison labor, which is essentially slavery? The prison industrial complex is such an important issue that hasn't been brought up. So Sean, you go first for a minute, and then Lulu.
I don't know how easy it would be to amend the 13th Amendment, but I would certainly be supportive of removing the subordinate clause in the 13th Amendment that says we're no longer having slavery except for cases of imprisonment. I have no problem with that. I don't know that we need to have prison labor, period. And if we can't do the constitutional amendment, you can certainly pass legislation that prohibits it. I also think this is an opportunity where you can end the practice and abolish private prisons. I don't think we need to have people making profit over imprisonment. And I think that that encourages the abuse of people that are incarcerated rather than the rehabilitation of people that are incarcerated. And we need to work towards ending mass incarceration rather than perpetuating it. So I think that answers the question. Hope.
Thank you, Sean. Lulu?
It's definitely an issue I'm going to add to my litany of things to research fully. But, you know, I think Sean and I are on the same page about this. I don't think that, you know, this is definitely a very interesting issue, and I feel a little off guarded, but I definitely am going to be looking more into it now that my interest is peaked. I say all the time on the campaign trail, I absolutely know what I know, but I also know what I don't know. So it's, you know, it's constituents like here in Collin County that bring forth issues that I, you know, have never thought about before. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, Lulu. All right, we have one. I actually do have time for one more question that an attendee asked. So, and we'll start with you, Lulu. Do you support legalizing or decriminalizing marijuana?
I do support decriminalizing and descheduling marijuana as a narcotic. So yes, I absolutely do agree with that.
And Sean?
Yeah, pretty simple. I think it should be descheduled. I think it'd be decriminalized. I think we should work with the states to get them to legalize it as a source of revenue.
All right, thank you all. So now we'll turn to closing remarks. We will start with Lulu for 3 minutes.
I think it's Sean first for 3 minutes.
Oh,
I think it is me first.
okay. Go ahead, Sean.
Okay. So I started this talking about we're at a moment of crisis and catalyst, and I still to this day now still think we are at a moment of crisis, but one of great catalyst where we can take what we know and build upon it and elect leaders that have strong progressive values and progressive ideals to build and grow the type of change that we need. To be able to protect people that don't have their health care so they don't have to choose between an expensive government option versus an expensive private insurance option. So be able to protect our future generations by making sure that our economy actually starts scaling towards green energy by a timetable that will make sure that we avoid the worst impacts of the oncoming climate catastrophe. That we're able to make sure that we address systemic racism, not just in our criminal justice systems, but across our society, and that we have a serious reckoning with the systemic and structural racism that abounds around us. Whether that is in our educational systems or our healthcare systems, our environmental justice systems, all of those systems, our societal systems in America are bound up in that type of systemic injustice. And we have to reflect on that, and we have to elect leaders that are willing to talk about that and come to terms with how we get that type of equality and equity to the people that need it the most. I believe I am that candidate. I believe I have the experience and the track record in this district to be able to make those things happen, or at least move us much closer in that direction. And I want you to be able to join our campaign so that you can bring big, bold, progressive change to our country, in our district, in our community. Our neighborhoods demand it. Our children demand it. We all demand that type of change because it is returning the power of the government to people. The Republican ideology is government doesn't work. And then they go about sabotaging government and dismantling it. But I fundamentally believe that these collective problems, our healthcare problems and our climate change problems, are collective societal problems that cannot be solved unless we come together as one and actually embark on bold initiatives to solve them. Sometimes it is often said during this coronavirus pandemic here in Texas that it's just all about individual responsibility. It's just about individual responsibility. The individually responsible thing to do is to vote for progressive leadership so that we can come together and actually build coalitions of success towards making big structural change. That's what this campaign is about. That's what I want to go to DC about. And I have a history of 20 years in this district fighting for truth against powerful interests. Empower me to go to DC for you so that we can actually get that change. Thank you so much. Oh, and let me just say at the very end, since I didn't say at the beginning, thank you to all of the Council of Clubs for having us. I saved a little bit of time there, Sarah, for having this debate. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Mark, for the moderation. Thank you, Sarah, for the timekeeping. You guys are awesome as usual. Thank you.
Thank you. Lulu?
If we want to flip this district, we need to elect the candidate with the best shot at beating Van Taylor. A lot of you guys already know that this district is now rated as lean Democrat, and that is thanks to all the hard work that a lot of y'all on this call did with Lorie Burch's race, with Beto's race, with Sharon Hirsch's race, with Sarah DePue's race, with Julie Luton's race, and with Mark Phariss' race too. You know, our campaign has had amazing victories. We have all the viable endorsements from the Dallas Morning News, the Stonewall Democrats, to the labor unions, to Congressman Mark Vesey. But truly our biggest victory was on March 3rd. That was when we got the most votes despite being outspent. That shows us that this campaign can beat big money. That shows us that this district is truly ready for change. It's ready to elect progressive leader, someone who looks like the district. It's ready to finally send a thought leader to Washington, and I'm ready to be of service. You know, in 2018, we had the most women and people of color step up to run for office. And they not only were successful, but they flipped congressional districts that no one thought they could flip. Many of those districts, like in Southern California, are similar to here in Collin County. Collin County is going to show the world now that they're ready to elect the right Democrat, to elect the first woman to represent us here, to elect the youngest member of the Texas delegation, to elect the first Lebanese American congresswoman, because Collin County is diverse and ready for change. Now, I know my opponent used our last forum to say that, you know, I was a Lebanese American, daughter of immigrants, that I talk too much about my identity. And I'll let those comments speak for themselves, but I do want to point out that we can't talk about COVID-19 or policing in this country without talking about identity. And talking about these two crises have disproportionately harmed communities of color, communities which have been left behind by politicians. You know, my campaign is about a new way forward, bringing about a new generation of leadership to the challenges we face right now and today. And we can't change Washington without changing who we send there. And if you're ready to join me in this fight to take on Van Taylor in November, we'd love to have your vote on July 14th. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Lulu. I hope everyone, if you will, visually, and maybe Joshua, can you unmute everyone? I would like to give both of these candidates a wonderful round of applause. So if we'll unmute everyone, thank you all very much. We are so, you clearly only heard me clap, which is, but in any event, I can't tell you how much I value the fact that you both have run. I can't tell you how much I am impressed by both of you and how much I really value your friendships. And so keep plugging. And I know that only one can win. It's a shame both of you can't because you're both fantastic. And I also want to thank all of our organizations again who sponsored this, the McKinney Area Democratic Club, the Collin County Young Democrats, the Plano Area Democrats, HD89 and WOW Dems. And Sarah, thank you for keeping us all on time. And we are ending this at 8:24, which is actually, I think, probably 6 minutes ahead of time. So who says Democrats can't run on time or early? Anyway, thank you all very, very much. You all have a great evening and enjoy the rest of your time.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks,
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Don't forget
Thank
to
you,
take
clubs.
those
See you, Lulu.
in Collin
Thank you,
Democrat.
guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, y'all. Have a good weekend.
That was well done. Thank you, Sarah.
Absolutely. I think it's still recording, just FYI.
Yeah, we're gonna keep it running. I'm gonna bring the
Okay.
the panelists back on for the clubs.
Cool. Yeah, no, that was fun. And they actually did pretty good on time. I was impressed. There was only a couple times where I'd be like, and thank you.
We got Frisco. We got some WOW.
Rad's in the house.
I need to start my video, y'all.
Hi, Rad.
Josh, can you start my video?
Who's speaking?
That's
Oh, it's
Debbie
Debbie.
O'Reilly.
It's,
There we
she
go.
does now.
Asked to start video. That should have done it.
There we go.
Nancy, here's two. Great debate.
Fantastic. Look at how talented both of them are.
3 glasses of wine in.
I also want to give a shout out while we're on here and people are hopefully still listening to us to all the calls and texting that's been going on.
Yes.
Super impressive. Our volunteers are really stepping up. I'm really impressed and grateful. So thank you to every single volunteer that's out there.
Yeah, we get a lot of awesome volunteers who are showing up every Monday, every Wednesday. And
Do I look bad or can I put my video on?
Please put your video on,
Put your
Lorie.
damn video on, Lorie. Come on now.
Maybe I'll put the baby on.
That's always going to be a hit. Yeah.
Oh, Lorie, just go you. You do you.
That was I was a little bit worried there at the very beginning that they were just going to agree and that we would be done in 25 minutes.
I thought they gave very thoughtful, thorough answers and a lot for people to contemplate before, 2 days from now? Oh my goodness, here we are.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, early vote starts on Monday.
Go.
And I thought our runoff was tough.
Yeah, I
And
know.
actually,
Lorie,
here's
right?
a really interesting fact. So I called the Collin County Elections Office because they had pulled their data down from Van and we couldn't figure out why. The number last reported about 2,200 people had voted by mail already. That's Democrats and Republicans, so it's a mix. But since we have more runoffs, I assume more of those are, and more of them were Democrats when it was at like 500.
My goodness.
Yeah, so this will be a good turnout.
Yeah.
Despite the odds, the Saharan desert and
Murder locusts.
virus
Don't forget
and the
murder
locusts.
locusts.
And the
Right.
locusts.
Yeah, I know. It's just like, what next? What next, 2020? What next?
Someone sent me a video.
Don't even ask. Don't ask.
Fair. Good point. I don't want to add like put the negative energy out
Get
there.
that seriously.
Just no.
Can we also remind everybody what they need to do for early voting about bringing masks and social
Great point.
distancing?
Yes.
One of the things they also suggested was bringing your own pen so you don't have
Yes.
to touch
Right.
anything in the office. And
Ah.
somebody I heard, I don't know who I was listening to, said bring a Q-tip so you can touch the touch screen so you don't have to touch anything.
Good
They're gonna
Don't know
do
if that'll work. I've never tried it, but it's certainly worth it. And
Yeah,
masks. Oh,
For so many
look.
people now
Look,
have
you guys,
little
look.
islands, but yeah.
Oh,
Now
yay!
has masks as well.
wait.
Go to
Let her be
WOW.org.
the one on the screen.
Yeah. Do you like it?
I love it.
Oh, there you go.
nice. Any Democrats?
That's good.
There
Lorie.
you are, Lorie.
Looking good, Lorie.
I saw a great video the other day where you were doing a video conference and Adley was behind you.
Yeah. She was eating. She was wheeled into my office by Kim, and I thought that was too funny, so I had to do a live video at the office. Hey, if I can be so bold as to just say a quick thing that I do appreciate the candidates for CD3, talking about the work that was done and you know, using my name. But you know, as many of you remember, I see Debbie and Julie on my screen. You feel the pain perhaps that it was, you know, hundreds of volunteers, and what we were able to accomplish was because of the work of people like you and a lot of the people who are watching and the tremendous volunteer effort. And so we've got so much momentum here in Collin County, and I'm forever indebted to them. And so I appreciate that I was the candidate on the ballot, but it really was a force and a movement. And so I just want to make sure that when anybody drops my name, they're dropping the name of hundreds of people that work tirelessly to see real change, real democratic change that really moved the needle and will continue to move the needle. And I'm very appreciative that we have two such strong candidates, as well as Tanner, who is in the primary. I mean, anybody who steps up and puts themselves out there, they're doing a tremendous service for our cause. And you know, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it always bends towards justice. So we've got to keep fighting for the right thing, and we're going to get there together.
Yeah. And it's going to be the biggest party we've ever been to in our lives. We're all going to cry and laugh and hug, hopefully hug. I don't know, maybe not in November. I don't know what's going to happen.
Also, we had a great kiss and make up party after the primary.
That is true.
In which the joke, and it had just started. We're talking about, what is this, March 3rd? We were already making jokes about how we should not kiss each other or hug each other because of coronavirus. Texas didn't even shut down for another 3 weeks.
Yeah.
We didn't like, the Costco's didn't run out of toilet paper till like the end of March.
Wow.
We're ahead of the game. I mean, Joshua, we're ahead of the curve, man. Like we're
So
3
much
weeks
winning.
ahead of everybody. Everything.
Yeah, at the beginning of March, we were starting to kind of hear the rumblings, and we actually were going to go on spring break, like a road trip, actual vacation. We were like, nope, staycation it is. And sure enough.
I just gotta say, when I was teaching, I left spring break, and I left for spring break, and I was like, man, I don't want to go anywhere. I have been working so hard. I just want to be at home, man. I just want to be home. And little did I know how much home I would be at. It wasn't a week, y'all. It was like still going on. Yeah. But I mean, but that's okay, because we're alive and we're protecting each other, and that's the most important thing.
I'd like to welcome to the live stream Matt Leahy, who's the SD seat rep for Senate District 8.
Hey, Matt.
Howdy, y'all.
Hey, Matt.
Hey.
What a debate, guys. We're lucky to have great candidates in Collin County, and just think of the ways we've come, where we've got choices to make, and it's not November yet.
Seriously.
And it's not an easy choice.
Yeah.
Right.
It is not easy.
Well, let's also add, of course, that yes, we all have to make our choice on July 14th, and we'll make a good one because we have good candidates. But after that, it's all hands on deck for whichever candidate who wins. Vote
I would
blue.
like to amend that. I would like to amend that to say, do not wait until July 14th. Get the early vote in.
Yeah. Yes.
So you can avoid people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Go as soon as you can.
Hi, Adley.
And like
Say
Julie
hi.
mentioned.
Oh my goodness.
Hey guys, can I have a quick COVID wine?
A what?
A quick COVID wine, because
Well, I mean,
July
would
15th.
you like red or white?
I don't care.
Both.
But July
Are we
15th,
cheers?
25th wedding anniversary, and my husband was going to take me to Paris.
Oh.
Sorry. That's lousy.
So maybe that's next year or the year after for 26 or 27.
Or the year after that, or yeah.
Michelle, did Chris tell you that before or after the anniversary? Because anyone can make plans in reverse. Oh, I was going to take you to
Oh
Paris.
no, I knew this since like February.
Yeah.
That really does.
Because we were going to do something cool for 20, but we were moving to Texas.
Yeah.
So we said 25 is the one.
Oh, that's rough.
Yeah, well, hopefully next year. But right now, Europe is making the smart choice of not letting in people from the
Right?
United States.
No Americans.
So
Right. Hopefully by 2022 or so, we'll be allowed to go back to,
Yeah.
right? Or maybe you can show that you've at least been like quarantined for 2 weeks and tested. Maybe we'll have testing by then.
Who knows what the world's going to look like by then?
Hey, Lorie, is that the future president of WOW Dems in your hands?
Heck yeah.
The president of America.
Maybe I don't know if you all saw her onesie, but it says, I love naps, but I stay woke.
Nice.
You waved oh, that's her wave, by the way.
So cute.
It's very regal. It's yeah.
It is. Hello, my people.
Does he give good speeches?
She does. She's got a lot to say. I'll tell you what. I don't know where she gets that from.
Can she do a good Elvis impersonation?
We'll work on that.
Working on it? Okay.
I don't know. There's really just one Elvis girl in the house.
That's right. That's right. She does a good growl right now, which I'm not really sure of this phase.
Oh, yeah. I don't know where it came from. Theo started growling.
Yeah.
Like 3 weeks ago. There's nowhere.
They're just figuring out their voices, but she really does say a lot of words. So of course I'm just assuming that she's really advanced.
Of course.
Like her mom.
Yeah. I mean, when she says mom or mama, I mean, I'm just anything she wants, diamond rings, ponies, mansions, whatever I could do. It's ridiculous.
Not to play Anderson Cooper over here, but what did Adley think of the debate?
She was holding out there to really, see some distinguishing remarks, but she finally got that. She's a big Sam Johnson fan, to be honest. So
who isn't?
Understandable.
Right.
Right.
We're all second to Sam. All good. Well, it's so good to see everybody.
You're talking about the judicial candidate and not the recently deceased retired congressman, right? We're talking about the CD3 debate. What is,
I do have to say this. I wish I had gotten that question, like what was my favorite case that I ever worked on.
What is your favorite? What was your favorite?
Yeah, what is it? Do tell.
Well, the fact of the matter is that, I mean, whenever I hear other candidates ask questions, I always think how I would answer them myself. And I thought that was such a great question. And the answer truly is that, a lot of people know I do wills and trusts and probate. And I, originally went to law school because I wanted to be part of a civil rights nonprofit and ended up finding my way through doing estate planning and probate of all things to really help make a difference. And every client, and I mean this sincerely, is my most important case, because when you're helping people navigate the fundamental mortality that all of us face, and certainly that we're facing right now with COVID-19, and being able to play a small part in helping people go through something that we all go through, and losing someone who's so close to us, or making those vital decisions on who would take care of my child if something happened to me, who would make sure that my same-sex spouse would be able to visit me in the hospital. Every single client, sincerely, is my most important case. And I know what has carried me through my practice and what makes me so passionate about what I do. And I think that when you talk about a political campaign and our representatives, we want them to treat every single constituent at that moment as their most important constituent, because that is truly who's electing us. That's truly who's representing us. And we need to have candidates who are of everybody from all walks of life. So I wish I'd gotten that question, because I felt so strongly about it when I heard it.
Lorie, I get the feeling you're just not done campaigning.
I just got a big mouth, Debbie. You know that.
I have a feeling you got a little run left in you.
I've got some gas in the tank. I'll tell you what, I'm doing some stuff on the side to really position my practice in a way where it can still help people, still help provide for our family, but allow me more freedom to really pursue other things, to where I can make sure that all people from all walks of life feel seen, heard, and represented, because that is what I was planted on this earth to do, and I will do it until my last breath.
Well, we are here to just let you do that.
I know you are.
Hey guys, I'm going to say goodnight. My computer's fan is running like top speed, so I think it's just done after all the excitement from the debate. So everybody, peace out. Love you guys.
All right, I'm gonna head out too. Love y'all.
Bye, Debbie.
Bye, everybody. So good to see everybody.
Off we go.
Bye, I miss you.
You can wrap this up, everybody.
I don't want to go.
So hard to say goodbye, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right, everybody stay safe, be good, vote
Thank you,
often,
Lorie.
vote early.
You're not from Chicago, are you?
No. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
We still have 17 people watching us.
I saw that.
Oh,
And
you're
how many-
welcome.
And 33 on the Facebook
It'll
Live.
be 2 in a second.
Oh,